CEOs at South Africa's largest JSE-listed companies earned total remuneration packages of 24.9 million rand on average in the last year. That's according to a new report by audit firm PwC. The report found that chief financial officers earn an average of 15.1 million rand. Executive directors earn an annual salary of 8.7 million. The report looks at remuneration trends, gender balances and pay reporting requirements at South African companies for 2017. CEO packages were up 1.3% compared to the same time in 2016. PwC Associate Director Leila Ebrahimi joins us now for more on that. Thank you so much, Leila, for your time today. Your latest report on these trends focuses specifically at the impact of corporate failures on executive remuneration. What did you find?
So we found that there's a growing requirement, a growing need for measures such as malus and clawback, and maybe I can quickly explain the two of them. I know that they're used interchangeably to some extent. So malus meaning any short-term incentive or bonus that's yet been unpaid, or any long-term incentive which is not yet vested, you're able to stop that vesting or stop the payment of the short-term incentive. Okay. And clawback is once it's already been paid, the short-term incentive or the long-term incentive is vested, you're able to actually claw that back for a certain number of years. Okay. So that's really about accountability in case things do go wrong, as we have seen happen, right? So internationally, we've seen that has been legislated. Within South Africa, it hasn't been legislated, but we have seen an increasing demand for this from shareholders, particularly in light of the corporate governance failures that we've observed lately. And the question is being asked, why aren't these policies in place? And should they be in place? And to what extent should they be invoked? Okay. Does the Companies Act speak to this at all? Companies Act doesn't. So obviously we have the fiduciary duties and the common law remedies that are available to us and the remedies under the Companies Act. But this is something more specific. So it actually speaks to being able to claw back the value that has been given to those executives, and where there is fault attributable to the executive, actually being able to claw back the value rather than, for instance, just the shares, which might actually hold no value anymore. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the broader remuneration trends and executive pay. We know that this has been under the spotlight globally, and particularly here in South Africa with the high levels of inequality. So have we seen any improvements, firstly, in just narrowing the gap from the lowest paid to the highest paid? And then secondly, we'll talk a little bit about the gender parity as well. Yes. So what's encouraging is, you quoted the 24.9 million figure earlier, and that reflects a 1.7% increase from last year. And that's encouraging because that's for the top 10 JSE-listed companies. So we are seeing a certain level of conservatism when it comes to increases for the top executives within organizations. Okay. So that's encouraging. It means that they are aware that there's increasing scrutiny of that. They are aware that actions need to be taken. And then on the other side, obviously with King 4, we have the increased focus on fair and ethical pay. Yeah. So we do have remuneration committees recognizing that they have a responsibility to actually think deeply about what is it to pay fairly and ethically, and not just focusing on executive pay, but actually looking at remuneration levels throughout the organization and thinking, what do we need to be doing at the lower levels to narrow that gap, as you spoke of? Yeah. And thinking about how do we want to pay, what is right for our organization, and then actually going further than that, and how do we implement it, and what are the actions that we can take to make that a reality? Okay. On the gender side, do the trends there reflect the representation that women have at executive level, would you say? I think they do. The gender pay gap is one thing. First, we need to actually make sure that there's women represented at these levels. And when we did the research, we saw that that's actually the first problem that we need to address. I mean, throughout the JSE, we're looking at about 2% women representation in terms of CEOs. So that's extremely low. But then again, internationally, we're looking at something like 4%. So it's low comparatively, but internationally, it's a problem. So that's the one problem. And only once that started to be addressed can we actually then start looking at the gender pay gap issue, because obviously that's also a problem, but the figures are skewed when you're looking at so few females in positions of power. Reporting trends, are we seeing more transparency? What are remuneration committees on these boards actually grappling with? We are, and it's very encouraging with the new voting regime that's been introduced by King 4, so the split between the vote on the policy and the implementation report, although they're still both non-binding.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of call for it to be binding and a lot of call for the remuneration policy to have to be approved by the shareholders before payments could be made in terms of that. With the split in the vote, we are seeing, and obviously the requirement that if you get a 25% or more negative vote, you do need to engage with your shareholders and demonstrate and tell the story within your report of what you have done to engage with your shareholders and take their concerns seriously. So with that, we have actually seen an increase in transparency. There is a desire to comply with the recommended practices of King 4 in terms of remuneration reporting. There's overall an increased level of compliance, increased level of disclosure. Shareholders are able to pick up the reports and actually see, okay, realistically, this is how I can compare these two organizations and this is what they're paying. And of course, importantly, with the single figure of remuneration, the new way of disclosing directors' emoluments, we can actually start to understand how pay is linked to performance during the year.
We'll leave it there. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Today, PwC Associate Director, Leila Ebrahimi.